Again, good afternoon and welcome to the Faculty Staff Town Hall sponsored by Penn State today. Today we will be discussing some changes to the university's budgeting approach. We've been soliciting questions for a couple of weeks now, but you can still submit those questions either on the paper that was handed out to you and passed down to the end of the aisle, online at questions@psu.edu, and on the Google form that is posted on liveevents.psu.edu. I may combine or condense some of the questions that we receive if they are similar or for time purposes, but I will retain the heart of all questions. We are live streaming this town hall, again at liveevents.psu.edu. So it is important that everyone follow the question procedures so that the online audience has just as much ability to pose questions as the in-person audience. Answering your questions today will be Executive Vice President and Provost Nick Jones, Senior Vice President for Finance and Business David Gray, and the University Budget Officer Mary Lou Ortiz. We've asked each of them to say a few words and then we'll get right to your questions. Provost Jones, we'll begin with you.
Thank you very much, Ben, and thanks to all of you for joining us today in person and online. I know we're about halfway through a busy fall semester, so I appreciate that you take some time from your schedules to participate in the town hall. All institutions of higher learning are facing new and rapidly evolving challenges. To address them, we can't be complacent. Periods of rapid and transformational change require transformational responses. So Penn State, as you all know, has been updating its core administrative functions by implementing several new enterprise management systems university-wide. The first one in 2015 was our student information system, LionPath. In late 2017, we launched WorkLion, the university's human resource and payroll system. And next up is the implementation beginning happening in July of 2020 is SIMBA, our new system for integrated management, budgeting, and accounting. SIMBA will replace Penn State's financial and other integrated systems, financial system and other integrated systems, including IBIS. We must modernize our systems, not only to thrive, but actually to survive, and we have seized these opportunities. SIMBA will provide more visibility to budgets across the institution and help make us more efficient, supporting our efforts to keep a Penn State education accessible and affordable. Our work to implement SIMBA prompted us to take the opportunity to re-examine Penn State's budget and how we develop and manage it. We charged a task force to identify more effective ways of doing our institutional budgeting. The group reviewed our budget processes, the budgeting and financial reporting tools that support it, and how revenues and expenses are managed and understood across the university. Based on the task force's recommendations, we are moving forward with new university-wide budget processes that are documented in the report, and we will be happy to discuss further today. Also, we simply need to find ways to cut additional expenses and costs out of our enterprise. For the current 2019 to 20 fiscal year, we need to find $36 million in previously unidentified recurring cost savings from our education and general funds budget. We've so far identified about $9 million, and to find an additional $11 million, we will be reducing current unit budgets by 1%. We have several other strategies in development to identify the additional $16 million. The 1% budget reduction is spread evenly across the university. We will work with all your units to effect these targeted reductions, and we will need everyone's help and support to accomplish that effort. We will approach this systematically and equitably, and mindful of the fact that people are our institution's greatest resource. The big question, what will this mean for me, is likely on your minds, and it is on ours. So we want to use this opportunity to speak to any concerns or questions that you may have. I'm happy to be joined here today with David Gray, Senior Vice President for Finance and Business, and University Budget Officer Mary Lou Ortiz, both of whom will join me in sharing their insights and taking your questions. Thank you for attending, and I'll hand over to David to say some opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Nick spoke to the imperative for the university to find ways to keep our education accessible and affordable. And so I want to talk to you about an initiative that is happening in parallel to the strategic budgeting task force recommendations and their implementation. And that is an initiative that we're calling euphemistically the Resource Optimization Initiative, or ROI for short. The ROI initiative is an outgrowth of a trustee task force. The Board of Trustees commissioned an affordability task force a couple of years ago, an outgrowth of a concern that I think we all share about the price tag that our students have to pay to attend here at Penn State. We really want to find legitimate ways and means to control those costs to our students that go beyond mere tactics like tuition freezes and really get at more sort of core activities of the university that we feel we can do in a more strategic and effective fashion. So what we have done, we retained the Huron Consulting Group that worked closely with senior administration and board leadership that came back to us a bit over a year ago with a number of recommendations for things that Penn State could consider doing differently to economize and make our operations more efficient. Very important to point out that Huron recognized that Penn State was starting actually from an enviable position relative to our peers, and that they acknowledged that we had already harvested here at Penn State the so-called low-hanging fruit. We'd done the things that a lot of our peers are just undertaking now, and so we have to climb a little bit higher up the tree in order to find additional savings. But what Huron identified was the potential for us over the next several years to achieve anywhere between $36 million and $88 million in recurring savings. And we have identified, the administration's identified 11 distinct work streams that are working across 4 broad categories of activity to really see what we can do to bring those savings into focus. So the 4 broad categories are workforce, cost drivers, academic program, and supporting techniques. In the workforce area, we have 4 identifiable work streams: human resources transformation, information technology transformation, communications, and research administration. Within the cost drivers category, we have non-sponsored research expenditures, health and fringe benefits, procurement and strategic sourcing, and optimizing our physical assets. In the academic programming space, we have growth of the World Campus and the Commonwealth campuses. And then in supporting strategies, we have the Financial Transparency Initiative, which is really all about what SIMBA will help to do to make our university lives simpler and easier in terms of our budgeting and financial management needs. So we really expect these efforts to pay substantial dividends over the next several years, but they will take and are taking a lot of hard work. Nothing is as easy as snapping your fingers and expecting to achieve instantaneous savings. These are difficult, painstaking, and time-consuming initiatives that are being led and driven by many of our university's leaders. And really, we count on their support to be able to bring this ROI initiative to its fullest potential. Even in the current year, as we ramp these efforts up, E&G savings from them are expected to yield $2.2 million and $4.9 million the following year, with greater savings possible if we're able to address some initiatives that will require some outside support and sponsorship. So the other important thing that I think will really demonstrate the university's utmost commitment to this effort is the fact that these 11 work streams are being overseen by an executive team that's comprised of President Barron, Provost Jones, Vice President Frank Guadagnino, and myself. We meet every 2 weeks. We have a designated project manager, Kurt Kissinger, from my office, who is helping to bring administrative and managerial support, project managerial support to that entire effort. Nothing speaks more loudly in my mind than the precious commitment of time from senior leadership to an initiative, and that, I think, is a keen signal of the importance in which we hold this resource optimization initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is the first time that Mary Lou Ortiz will be joining us on stage for one of our town halls. But as the university's budget officer, she has in-depth knowledge of the upcoming changes to our university budgeting process. If you would say a few words.
Thanks, Ben. As Nick mentioned in his opening remarks, the financial landscape for higher education in general, and in turn for Penn State, has changed rapidly over the past decade. Penn State's been successful in navigating these changes to date. However, in order to continue to thrive, the budgeting approach and tools that served us well for so long need to be updated. Our primary constituents, our students, as well as our institutional and board leadership, expect greater efficiency and transparency to provide an affordable education for students and to continue to exceed our research and service missions, which have a global impact. The Strategic Budget Task Force reviewed our current budget approach and processes and made recommendations to chart a new path. We endeavored to learn from our rich history while analyzing current and future approaches to budgeting. We also looked to take advantage of our new financial technology, SIMBA, which was going live next July. SIMBA will be a critical tool for us to provide transparency in how we use our resources based on the data we're able to collect, analyze, and report. However, our approach to the processes of budgeting and planning based on that data is where we will find the synergies that drive our decision-making to keep us a leader in higher education. The task force, whose members you can see on the screen, focused at a high level on overarching budgeting principles rather than on specific processes and involve representation from across the university. Through a rigorous timeline and process, we developed a set of guiding principles, reviewed our past and current state, benchmarked against peer institutions, and developed a set of 9 recommendations submitted to Nick and David for review. These recommendations will allow us to be more strategic in our resource management and enable us to do longer-term planning. We are now moving into the implementation phase, in which a set of 4 tactical working groups will operationalize the recommendations. They will be tasked with determining how, when, and in what way they will be adopted and put into action. A smaller overarching team will oversee this work so that we adhere to sound project, change management, communication, and training processes to minimize impacts and maximize outcomes. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to read the full report from the Strategic Budget Task Force, which is available on the University Budget Office webpage, and there's also a link on here to that that you can lead to for the news article. Thank you.
Thank the 3 of you as well. I'd like to once again remind you that you can pass your questions written on paper to the ends of the aisle. You can submit them via email to questions@psu.edu or use the Google form that is linked on liveevents.psu.edu. And as Mary Lou mentioned, that the report is also linked on that same website, so we've put everything on one site for you. One of the most common questions that we've received so far is, why are we changing our budget model?
Well, Mary Lou, given that it's your first town hall, I think maybe you should respond to the first question.
Thanks, Nick. So the way that we handled budgeting at the university served us well for a long time, but as I mentioned earlier, the landscape really is changing for us, both in higher ed and for Penn State in particular, and we need to be responsive to those changes and look at ways to manage more effectively. The feedback that I've heard is that there could be better tools and better ways of looking at our funding more holistically, and the recommendations from the task force really focused on a different way of looking at our resources so that we can manage not only how we're using our funds in the current year, but think to the future, look at multi-year budgeting, look at how we manage our funds holistically for all types of expenses. And so the recommendations are very much geared towards thinking about our resources and how we plan for future use of them in a different way than we have traditionally done in the past.
I know we're not going to make a habit of following up on everybody's answers, but this is kind of an important one. So I'm going to flip this question back to the audience and give an example. So by a show of hands, how many people in this audience fully understand permanent and temporary funds and how they work? Okay, so
I saw 4.
Right, there's your answer right there, why we need to rethink our budget process, because I think the fact that, and I know some of you were probably a little bit nervous to put your hands up and you probably understand it a little bit better than you're letting on, but I remember when I first came to Penn State and sat down with Mary Lou's predecessor and asked her to explain how the budget process worked at Penn State. We spent about 20 minutes with me, her explaining to me permanent and temporary funds and how they interacted. And I remember at the end looking at her and saying, I think you're making this up, right? Because it's very complicated, and actually it's unusual for an institution to budget its funds in this way in two buckets, one that is really recurring and another that is where most of the one-time expenditures occur. Bringing these two together into a single budget approach gives us a whole lot more flexibility to address the types of financial challenges that we are seeing now and are continuously being imposed upon us. And so imagine a world sort of starting a year and a bit, or just less than a year from now, where you're just budgeting one type of fund, but keeping track of it over a multi-year period. That gives us much better transparency, and certainly I would think that if we're doing a town hall 2 years from now on the same topic, and I ask who understands how the university budgets its resources, there should be more hands go up. The fact that hands are not going up when I ask a question like that shows that we do not have a system that is adequately transparent and understandable. And if it's not, we can't do our jobs as well as we need to.
And the people whose hands did go up, there will be a test afterwards.
Right. Or actually, maybe they could just join us on stage.
You brought up the temporary versus permanent funds. I understand from our audience members that there has been some confusion based on the similarities between terminology of funds versus personnel. Could you clarify that?
I think what has happened because of the bifurcation that we've historically had between permanent and temporary funds is it's lent itself to a similar bifurcation between permanent, standing positions and temporary positions, and that's unfortunate. I think a lot of people that are hired here at Penn State into non-standing temporary positions feel a sense of angst about their positions from year to year because there appears not to be any permanence to the commitment of the university to those roles that they're occupying. And so as we make this shift in our budget model, which I think is long overdue, we should be making similar shifts, corresponding shifts in our designation of our human resources, our employees, and trying to move away from that distinction between permanent or standing positions and fixed term or temporary positions.
What are the biggest changes that the average Penn State employee will notice with these upcoming changes?
I think it's Simba, and the interface with Simba is probably going to be the thing that most people interact most directly. So maybe Mary Lou, you can talk about that a little bit.
So IBIS, the current system, IBIS, does provide us with a lot of data, but what we've seen as we have been in the process of implementing Simba is that it's not consistent. Data is not entered in a consistent way, and so we're moving towards more consistency in our chart of accounts because the framework of our budget lends itself to also adding data in a particular way. We're not as transparent with our information as we could be. So Simba will be the tool that will allow us to do much more robust data reporting. It will be a much less manual process for us, and I think for most day-to-day users, there are other aspects of the financial system that are very manual that will then move to more electronic and more modern ways of handling financial transactions at the university.
We've read some things about a change to multi-year budgeting. Can you explain why the university is shifting away from, or shifting towards that?
Let me take a stab at that. So much of what we do here at the university that is of strategic importance spans multiple fiscal years. A lot of the most impactful things that we do can't be undertaken and accomplished within the span of a single fiscal year. So giving the ability and the tools to our unit executives, our unit budget executives, be they deans or others, giving them the tools to be able to project their needs for some of these strategic initiatives and priorities over multiple years really fits the time duration or the time span that it will take to accomplish those initiatives. And so that's one of the things that I think I'm most excited about with the shift to our new SIMBA system next summer, is that ability to give multi-year budgeting tools to the folks that are responsible for managing the resources of their units and the larger university. I think it's just absolutely crucial, again, given the most challenging and resource-consumptive initiatives are often those that take a longer time horizon to accomplish than a single year.
Now, if I may add, I think that the construct that we've had of permanent and temporary funds has enabled us to do that because it's the temporary funds and the carry forward of temporary funds from year to year has allowed units to set money aside for some of those longer term projects. But because it was never really formally budgeted, that process lacked discipline and rigor, so it was easy to be sloppy in our long-term planning. Having everything on the table and budgeting everything together, a single source of funds, and doing it over multiple years really enables us to be much more deliberate in the way we do that from how we've done it before.
We've had several versions of this question come in, all similar to the fact of they feel that their department doesn't have any room to make any more cuts in their budget and are curious how they can make those changes going forward if they don't see where to cut.
You know, I could take this one. Yes, we are sort of we hear this a lot, we're the Lake Woebegone of higher education, right? Every department has cut more than other departments have. But it is true that across the institution that some units and subunits have been more disciplined in this space than others. And so rightfully, people wonder why it is that they should endure further reductions when they've already stepped up and made what they consider to be necessary and important changes to their budgets. We are going to be mindful of that. The 1% across the board cut is something that we believe can be absorbed by all units. We still have to find an additional $16 million. We will be talking with individual units where we think there is opportunity for them to reduce expenditures a little bit further. And in implementing that process, we really will be mindful of units that have been more disciplined and done some of the work already to reduce their expenditures.
If we're going to stick with Lake Woebegone, I think we can all agree that all our children, and meaning our students, are above average. Wow, I don't have a lot of Garrison Keillor fans there.
Not sure where you're going with that one, Ben. But
It was a line from Lake Woebegone. Wow, I'm older than I thought. Anyway, one of the things the people have asked is, are there going to be another voluntary early retirement program as in hopes to deal with some of this budget shortfall? Or is that a consideration?
Well, first, just to clarify, it wasn't we didn't do a voluntary early retirement program. It was a voluntary retirement program. Everybody who participated in that program was already eligible to retire, so there was no early in it. The nature of a voluntary retirement program means that even if we were thinking about one, we couldn't tell you, right? So I have to give a complete, flat, non-response to that question, which doesn't mean we are or we are not thinking about it. It's sort of it's an impossible question to answer, because if we tell you that, yeah, we're planning on a voluntary retirement program, then it would completely undercut the effectiveness of the program, because everybody would wait for the program before they retired, and then it wouldn't have the desired effect. So at this point, there is no voluntary retirement program that is in the works. We can't, of course, rule out that at some point in the future, we might do another one. We've done several in the past, but I wouldn't advise anybody to wait for one.
With these new systems coming in, what kind of training will be available for people to learn how to operate these new systems?
Oh, I can answer that one. So the SIMBA Project Management Office has developed a comprehensive series of training sessions that will be deployed, mostly closer to go live. It's a lot of the studies have shown around training has shown that you really need to do just-in-time training rather than start training now, because if you're not using the system, it's not effective. And so most of those trainings will take place in May and June of next year. However, they are also doing some pre-work with Budgeting 101, Accounting 101, and a series of 101 trainings to help people understand the reasons why we are moving towards some of the practices that we will be using with SIMBA, such as accrual accounting, some of the ways that we'll be handling budgeting to help prepare people. Debbie Meter, who I see in the audience, leads an online webcast, I guess is the best way to describe it, that gives a lot of information about SIMBA. So I encourage people to go to the SIMBA website and look at the resources that are available there, because there's a ton of information that's available already about what the upcoming changes are going to be and what the impact will be on individual users. But we will be doing training, and we will require that hands-on users of the system engage in the training before they're able to use the system.
We'd like to see Debbie Meter trending on YouTube, so I really encourage you all to get out there. But no, seriously, I think you would find her video sessions to be most informative and give you much better insight into what this is all about.
Just to maybe emphasize one point Mary Lou made there, is that there is a minimum level of training that is going to be mandatory for anybody who is using SIMBA. We haven't really done that before. We held the threshold a little bit higher, and so people who were lower level users of systems didn't really have to do mandatory training, but we feel that it is prudent for SIMBA that anybody who accesses the system must have a minimum level of training. It's not very onerous to be obviously a user at a higher level. You'll need more training, but even basic users of SIMBA will be required to do a basic level of training.
And where should people go to find those trainings?
They can go to the website, which it's simba.psu.edu. Do I have that right? Yes.
David, this one would be for you. What is the status of the ROI search?
What's the status of the ROI program?
Yes.
It's as I indicated earlier, Ben. I think it's coming along very well. Some of the work streams are a little farther along than others, but part of our our project management process is literally tracking the progress in percentage terms of each of those 11 work streams that I identified earlier. We are asking there are leaders that are identified for each of those 11 work streams, and we ask them as part of our project management discipline to update their progress through a series of templates, Word templates and Excel templates, literally on a monthly basis, so that we have the means to track progress very closely. And as I mentioned, we set up regular meetings. Just had one this morning at 8 o'clock with President Barron, with the Provost, myself, and Frank, and Kurt, and others, to go over the progress specifically with 3 of those work streams. So we are keeping on top of it. They're making, in general, on average, I think they're making terrific progress. Bear in mind that, as I say, the higher you climb up the tree to harvest the fruit, the more arduous that task becomes, the longer it takes. We are getting there, but a lot of these initiatives are going to take 3 to 5 years to really enable that harvesting of all the benefits that we expect to receive. That doesn't mean it's not worth doing. It just means that it's not an instant gratification process. It's time consuming, but we're absolutely 100% committed to that endeavor.
Between this and the 1% notification, if we have open positions in our departments, how should we treat those at the moment?
I think that to the extent that people vacate positions through either retirement or resignation, that the unit executives ought to be putting a hold on those positions, at least for now, and be engaging in conversation up the organizational ladder on the academic side of the house with the deans and the provost, on the administrative side of the house with either myself or others that head up their respective units, and understand the strategic dimensions of each position, each vacancy that occurs, and the need to refill it. In some instances, I think those positions will probably need to be frozen for an extended period of time, again to contribute toward that 1% that we're trying to achieve. But if a business case can be made about the strategic importance of that position to the unit, then of course we're going to grant the approval for that hiring process to move forward.
I think one can argue that this is a process that we should always follow. Actually, whenever there is a retirement or a departure in a unit of either a member of the administrative staff or a faculty member, it's always an opportunity for that unit to rethink the position and be thoughtful about what the replacement hire should look like if there is to be a replacement hire. I think we do that often. This is a really important time for us to be doing that. We should not be just automatically flipping positions and immediately posting a copy of what existed before, but as David said, thinking very strategically about that role and how it fits into an overall vision of the future of the unit. I hate to bring up the VRP again, but when we did the last university-wide VRP, that actually gave us an opportunity to do that very effectively. And those of you who were here during that time will recall that we did give the unit executives an opportunity to request immediate rehires, because there's no question that some of the positions that were lost to retirement did need to be replaced, and replaced pretty much right away, because they were key and critical positions. But what I noticed, certainly on the academic side, and I'm sure David noticed on the administrative side as well, is that many of the requests that came in for immediate rehires were in fact examples where the opportunity was taken to rethink the role and rethink the position and maybe orient in a slightly different direction. Certainly true on the faculty side, because when a senior professor retires after a 30 or 40 year career, it may well be that his or her field has moved in a different direction. So you're not going to hire somebody in exactly the same area. You may be looking in a different direction to take advantage of that position. And I think to some extent that is true on the administrative side as well. But this is an important time to think very, very carefully about every replacement hire.
And that transitions to another question we received. What can the average Penn State employee do to help with this effort?
I think each and every employee has an opportunity to play a contributing role here, Ben. You may have some discretion over spending, over travel, over business-related meals that you can, sort of put a damper on. One thing that I think people often overlook. Our employees are the best sources of expertise about their respective roles, whether they're on the academic or the non-academic side of the house. Those folks oftentimes have great insight into ways in which the university might be able to streamline the operations that they help to support. And we would ask also for them to feel free to come forward. There is no single set way of doing business. We want to leave no stone unturned. So we are really thinking this is an opportunity for each and every Penn State employee to engage and thinking about how they can contribute, even in small ways, toward this initiative. Because if there are enough small contributions, they add up. They become consequential in the aggregate. And so, in the process of leaving no stone unturned, employees, I think, have a lot to contribute to the process.
I could just give an example because it just happens to be one that's on my mind. Sorry, Holly, but I'm going to bring this one up. How many of you have been to a Penn State event where there was food and you ran out of food? Anybody? How many of you have been to a Penn State event when you were one of the last people to leave the event and there was a whole lot of food left over? Right, okay, so there's an opportunity right there. We have a little bit of a tendency to over-cater. And we're a big university. We have a lot of events. And if we over-cater every event, and how do we over-cater? Well, you get the sheet of paper where you have to sort of check off the things that you want and you don't want. And you just say, yeah, this looks about right, and you just sign and out it goes. In a case like that, you can be more thoughtful, more mindful about what exactly the event is and what you need. And try to get the quantities about right. That doesn't mean that you want to leave half the people without any food on their plates, but this notion that there's always a whole bunch of food left over, much of which goes to waste at the end of the event, that is money that we are really wasting. And it doesn't really take much of an effort to think about that and see if you can cut your expenditures a little bit. And I mention that because we had an event last night where we did exactly that. We cut back a little bit on what we would normally do, and I think everybody was perfectly happy, and I think there was still food left over at the end. But it's an opportunity, and you might look at any single event and think, well, this is not going to help the university find $36 million. But when we add that up across this huge enterprise, all these little contributions do add up, actually.
I'd like to just add one other thing. So tying back to the ROI work that the various groups have been doing, one of them is around the way that we manage purchasing at the university. And part of the savings that we can achieve is to use the buying power of the university in negotiated contracts for large volumes of purchases, such as computers, and office supplies and things like that. So encourage everybody to make sure that they're taking advantage of those, and then instead of going out on each department's P card and buying things directly from Office Max or Staples, but instead to leverage the university's buying power so that we can continue to achieve the volume savings that we can negotiate because we purchase from one vendor with a negotiated contract, and that would have actually a fairly significant impact on our overall resources at the university.
Before we go on, could you move your microphone just a little higher?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Another question that came in from the audience, how far ahead are we looking with this new technology? If these initiatives might take a couple of years, are we still going to be there at the forefront where we need to be?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Simple answer.
Should we think about that a little bit before we answer? I think we've learned, Penn State has learned the lesson of what happens if you fail to invest in technology in a timely manner over long periods of time. So, I know you all know what I'm talking about. Those screens that you see on people's desks that look like they're from the 1970s, they are. For us to have not invested in a business information system beyond our homegrown one for decades is just not the way that we can run a modern, efficient, large enterprise that Penn State represents. And so I think we have learned the lesson that not only do we need to be using modern technologies, but we need to keep them updated as well, just like you keep apps and operating systems on your phones updated. If we don't, we fall behind. As we've moved to cloud technologies, I think that really has facilitated this because, for example, Workday is a cloud-based service. And so Workday updates pretty much every day. They're doing micro updates. We don't even see them. So the days of doing big upgrades on an episodic basis is behind us. So we need to stay at the forefront of technologies now. And I think now that we've made this big effort and we've dragged you all through 6 years of constant churn and change in all of these big systems, we're not going to allow ourselves to fall behind again, and we're going to stay right at the cutting edge.
These technology investments are really enabling investments. In fact, I think I could argue quite persuasively that if we don't make those investments, the university will be ill-prepared to address some of the challenges of the present and the future. So it's not as though we have a choice. If we want to do these things that we need to do so that we can live within our means, so that we can offer students a more affordable and accessible education, it's absolutely essential that we make these kinds of investments.
We've been talking a lot about the expense side of things. We had a question from the audience. Are we looking at ways to increase non-tuition-based revenue?
I think the answer to that is yes. We are looking at ways in which we can grow revenue in addition to curtail or limit expenditures and cost increases. In the tuition-based area, we certainly are looking, and in fact I mentioned one of our 11 work streams under the ROI initiative is continued growth of the World Campus. That's been an extremely important growth driver for the university for well over, for 20 years. And it needs to continue to be additive to our bottom line. But I think there are also areas where we can look at ways in which we may be able to monetize some of our existing assets to the benefit of our, in the non-tuition space, to help accrete to our bottom line. And we're looking at those also as part of our ROI initiative.
Another place that I think most of you have heard us even quite recently brag about our research expenditures as an institution. Last year we were at $967 million, just shy of $1 billion of annual research expenditure. That $1 billion threshold is really just around the corner for us. We are certainly looking to make strategic investments in our research enterprise. While a lot of the revenue that comes in to support research gets spent on the research itself, provided we can manage the growth and manage our investment appropriately, we do generate on the margin through the facilities and administrative cost return support for our research enterprise. And so growth and research is another way we're able to grow revenues for the university. But it requires investment in people and physical plant to make that happen.
Related question to that, will this have any impact on Penn State's ability to streamline that grant approval process to help attract research faculty to the university?
I think the answer to that is yes. I think that part and parcel of SIMBA is support for grants accounting, and again using a much more modern and streamlined platform. So I would certainly hope that it would contribute in a positive way to our ability both to manage as well as to more favorably position us to receive grants in the future. Our ability to manage those grants well is of paramount importance. If we stumble at all in that regard, we really hurt ourselves. That's something that the federal government in particular watches over very closely. How precise is our grant accounting? How well do we manage that, and effort reporting and things of that nature? And so our ability to track that well and responsibly is crucial to our continuing ability to garner those grants in the future.
And we've seen over the last 20, 30 years or so a shift in the nature of our research projects. Back when I was an assistant professor, most of the grants that were coming into my department, my university, were smaller single investigator grants. Now much more, we've seen a trend to larger, more complex, multi-investigator initiatives. Those are more complex to prepare and then more complex to manage when they come in. So I think, again, having these modern contemporary tools that can help us with that is going to facilitate growth in that space, which is very important for our future.
Question from the audience: is there a way, as part of this new process or recommendations, that we could cut down on unit-to-unit billing?
That's a good question, but it's difficult to answer. We think that our billing unit to unit is done in accordance with sound business principles. Sometimes the support services that units provide have a cost attached to them, and it's just good cost accounting to pass those costs back to the unit that's really sponsoring those activities in the first place. It's certainly something that we'll want to take a look at, but I don't really think there are any dramatic changes in the offing there.
I think there are, what we find sometimes is that we have over many years built up processes that are quite complex, and I think one thing that we probably want to try to avoid is unnecessary flows back and forth, and often we find ourselves in a position where there's a bunch of flows going left to right and another bunch of complementary flows going right to left, and so there's a lot of busy work going on with these transfers back and forth when maybe there's an opportunity to step back, kind of like what we did with the Strategic Budget Task Force, and look at the bigger picture and just ask ourselves, are there simpler ways to affect this? As David said, some of it it's basic cost accounting. We need to make sure the dollars are flowing where they need to flow. But if there are ways that some of these processes can be rationalized, simplified, I think that's in everybody's best interest. And we did see that happen. Some of you may be aware as we implemented LionPath, we were able to get a little bit more clarity into some of the processes that underpin, for example, transfer credits, and realized that over time we'd built an incredibly complex process for managing transfer credits, and realized that the only thing to do was really to just blow up and re-engineer the whole process. And that is something that is ongoing now, and we're trying to make that a much more efficient process than it's ever been before. And I'm sure this transition will reveal opportunities for that as well.
We had a question come in. Are there any thoughts to incentivize departments for coming in under budget, or for making those cuts that you're requesting, or even going beyond?
That's a good question. We certainly have incentives for them to not fail. But I think it's a very good question. We have had some conversations about whether we could create sort of some competitions or some, a little bit of friendly rivalry across departments in a college or between colleges to see in particular areas if there are opportunities for them to really drive efficiencies in the unit. I don't think we have anything specific or tangible, but it's actually a great suggestion, and we can probably challenge ourselves to think of some opportunities in that space, I would think.
Is there an effective date that you're trying to get to this 1% number?
That's pretty much immediately because it's in the unit's permanent budget that has already been basically allocated for the year, and we will be notifying budget executives that we will be reducing their permanent budget probably fairly soon. The communications will go out, so the budget will be reduced, and then of course units will have the rest of the fiscal year to figure out how to extract those savings.
And a follow-up to that, is there any timeline for the investigation for those additional cuts?
You want to take that one?
We will need to do that this fiscal year. I would expect that by early spring, we'll have another round of information to try and achieve the rest of the savings that have not been identified so far for this year.
The reason to get the across-the-board cut notification out sooner is that we're being non-specific with units. We're just saying we think that there's enough sort of surge in your system that you can pull this out, and we want to give folks plenty of time to figure out how to do that. I think as we go back looking for other opportunities for budget reductions, they will be much more targeted, and those will be facilitated through conversations with individual units. So even though they come a little later in the year, we will be targeting areas where we think that the savings truly exist. Of course, we will be targeting areas where we think the savings exist. We may run into some differences of opinion on that, so we don't want to start too late in the fall, but at the spring. But I think spring is when we'll see those play out.
We have gotten some questions of concern. Are layoffs being considered to reach these numbers?
We're going to work really hard to minimize the effect on our people. I don't think there's any question that at Penn State, as in any institution of higher education, people are, without any doubt, our most important resource. For better or worse, they also make up about 2/3 of the budget. People, labor costs, if you will. So difficult decisions are going to have to be made by budget unit executives as to how they're going to arrive at the 1% reduction. Certainly, freezing vacancies is the first go-to. We would hope that with that, and as well as other non-personnel cost reductions that they can find within their operating budgets, that we could stop there and avoid any further or more dramatic consequences. But we need every unit to be thoughtful and selective as they go about this process of filling empty positions, and look carefully at where their dollar commitments are and where they feel they can trim the sails, so to speak.
Has there been any consideration to cutting back hours to certain areas that would be lower in the summer, or something of that nature?
Certainly something we can contemplate. I don't think we've talked about that specifically as a tactic, but certainly something we could give consideration to, bearing in mind that those hours, generally speaking, are going to meet basic fundamental needs of the university, and what we don't want to do is wind up cutting essential services that have damaging impacts to the ability of the university to meet its fundamental mission.
Yeah, there was a time, and it wasn't too long ago, where we were considering more, I would say, severe actions. That was, some of you may recall, there was uncertainty several years ago whether or not we would actually get an appropriation from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania at all. And that was going to impose a fairly major cut on the E&G budget of really of order 12% of the budget. That's a big number. 12% is a big number. When we were faced with that prospect, we had no choice but to consider furloughs, layoffs, the potential for reduced hours in non-critical areas, perhaps over the summer. What we're talking about this time is a 1% across the board reduction. For those who've been here for a long time, you'll remember that you had all endured 25 years of recycling. And recycling was generally a 1 to 2% reduction in everybody's budget every year. That money came back centrally and then was allocated out for strategic purposes. So most of our units, I think, are comfortable. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say they're happy, but they are comfortable with the notion of having to scrape 1 to 2% out of their operating budget because they got used to doing that over many, many years. Now, we haven't done it for 5 years. So for some in the units, it's going to be a new thing, but there is some experience there. And so I think we're confident at this point that we're not doing specific planning for layoffs or anything that draconian at this point. When we focus on the more targeted savings, there we'll be working with units to see where we really see opportunities for restructuring or reallocating resources, but that's really going to be done on much more on a one sort of a case by case basis. So I wouldn't refer to that as sort of a layoff scenario.
We had a follow-up question from an earlier topic. Apparently, there's still some confusion on the temporary versus standing, and what will we be moving towards if we're not going to have that?
So let me see if I can answer that. What we're moving away from is categories of permanent and temporary in the way that we budget. So going forward, we will have one education and general budget allocation that units will receive without that distinction within it. Standing and fixed term are about the salaries and how we handle positions. But I just want to make a distinction between how we fund units and thinking about a budget allocation that is really a resource that is managed at the unit level as opposed to how they manage positions. They obviously have a relationship with one another, but I think we need to do more work on what the implications are of changing away from the standing versus fixed term positions. What we've done over time is assume that permanent and fixed term belong together and permanent and standing belong with one another, and that's a construct of our own making. It's not the way that we would necessarily have to operate. But at least for next fiscal year, as we move into SIMBA, we will be moving to a more holistic approach to the budget allocation, and then making sure that any impact on standing versus fixed term positions are sorted out through looking at our policies, looking at regulations around those things, what are our processes around hiring, so that we can make sure that when units manage positions, they understand where they will need positions that have an end date for things like grants or specific projects, and where they just need positions to accomplish the tasks and goals of that particular area, and do away with this notion that some employees are standing and some are fixed term.
So by the way, how many of you are, show of hands, are in a unit where you are aware that there are people or a person on a fixed term appointment for really what is a necessary long-term position in the department? Right. Okay, so I'm hoping that a year from now, if we ask the same I mean, that's not even a question that we'll be asking, because everybody's position will be budgeted from the same source of funds. So that angst that many people have of, I know they want me back next year, but I'm only funded on temporary funds on a 1-year contract. What does that mean? We should be getting fairly quickly out of that business and removing that concern that people have. If you're in a position that is needed, there will be funds in the budget to support it. This is a big change from where we have been before, and I think will bring a whole lot more security to positions.
Are we willing to consider some perhaps more modern ways to get a job done, hiring freelancers or something like Upwork, or allowing people to work from home to reduce costs here, things of that nature?
I think in things like telecommuting models, Penn State's probably lagged some of our peers. We certainly lagged the general commercial world, and I think it probably is time for us to rethink the model of everybody coming to a physical location every single day to perform their duties. And in fact, in the case of the World Campus, we can already see that that's not necessarily the case, that we have, I think, a healthy number of faculty, Nick, that aren't physically located here in, or at one of our Commonwealth campuses. So I do think that we can begin to think about, at least, and envision a design where not everybody needs to report to a physical location each and every day. The important thing is making sure that the duties and responsibilities of their positions get fulfilled, no matter where they may be working from. So just as an example, I think that is something, Ben, that we can and should be looking at modernizing.
Is this going to be a change to an RCM, a responsibility-centered management budget model?
Well, Mary Lou knows RCM, so we'll let her answer, because she's lived through it, so
Yes,
we'll let her answer that.
I have lived through it. So no, this is not a move to responsibility-centered management. So for those of you who are not familiar with what that is, a responsibility-centered management approach to budgeting assumes that units fall into one of two categories. They're either a responsibility center, which manages all of their revenues and expenditures, including indirect costs within their budget, or they're a cost center, which provides support to the responsibility centers. Those typically fall into central administrative areas like HR, legal, the controller's office, and things like that. So we are not moving towards a model where colleges and campuses retain all of the revenue that they presumably generate and then pay for services that are provided centrally. That's not a model that the task force nor I think our leadership felt was an appropriate one for Penn State, particularly because we're an institution that very much values collaboration and working across different areas of the university, and a responsibility center management approach tends to promote more individual actions and less collaborative ways of managing finances and therefore programs.
Can you point to some examples where we're doing it really well, where we are reducing cost or increasing revenue, something of that nature?
I think in our approach to the enterprise system transitions that you've all been participants in, willing or otherwise, over the past 6 years is a good example where I think a lot of other institutions are looking at what we have accomplished in a relatively short time period and using that as a model. We get feedback from some of the vendors from time to time. These are major vendors who look to Penn State and see Penn State as a model for some of their other customers or clients moving forward, because they think that we are doing this very well. Listen, I know that there were times in the Lion Path transition and the Workline transition where that thought probably didn't occur to you that we were actually doing this really well, because we went through lots of bumps. But these are big, complicated transitions, and we are a big, complicated university. And you bring those two things together, these are just hard transitions to effect, period. But we've actually you all have done an extraordinary job just rolling up sleeves and making this work. And I think we are held up as a model in many instances to other places, and people certainly want to learn from our experience and plan their deployments around the types of things that we are doing.
Based on the experience of our peers, and this is something that I lived through at my prior institution, I think it's reasonable to expect, and often is the experience, that it takes 2 to 4 years following a major system transition for the institution to really harvest all the benefits from those, for people to come up to speed and feel conversant with that new technology platform, and to really gain efficiencies relative to the system that it replaced. And I think that's holding true here at Penn State, and we'll see that. In fact, I would argue that we're already seeing that as well with the migration toward HR shared services that was part of the HR transformation initiative. Still more work to be done there without any question, but I don't think there is any doubt that migration to an HR shared services model has yielded enormous benefits to Penn State in terms of streamlining and efficiencies of HR processes. And I think the same will hold true over the course of the next several years as we look at the IT transformation opportunities that are in front of us.
And I was actually going to add that in the IT space, there are some things that we can point to there where we have made very deliberate strategic decisions about direction that have worked well for us. One great example, and some of you may have heard this before, is firewalls. Several years ago, we had I think it was 170 firewalls distributed across the university. That was a poor model. It was outdated. So were the firewalls outdated? But you can imagine this took a lot of people in aggregate to manage all of these firewalls in different parts of the institution. We're now down to, I would like to say we're down to 2. I think it might be like a handful, like 5 or something. But we have literally decommissioned 160 odd firewalls across the university and gotten rid of the hardware cost burden that represented, as well as the cost associated with managing those systems. So this has really been a big success for us. We've also significantly consolidated the number of data centers. You know, the days of needing to have every unit to have its own sort of local data center, those days are gone. And we're well along the path to consolidating our data centers down to a small handful. It won't be 2 because there are units that have special needs that really demand their own installations. But just reducing that down from literally hundreds of data centers spread across the university to a much smaller and more manageable number, I think is another example where there's been considerable direct and indirect savings that have been achieved.
Just to build on that, by a reasonable count, we operated 41 separate email and calendaring systems. We're now down to 1. It's cloud-based. So not only have we consolidated in a very effective and efficient way and given faculty, staff, and students, our entire student body, access to a very high-performing, shared email and calendaring system, we've also removed the onus on Penn State IT resources to support the technology, the hardware, and the software. So we've outsourced that in effect, and at the same time given our entire university community better collaboration tools to boot. So that, to me, that's a win-win if ever there was one.
Yes, and believe us, you all generate a lot of email, and now we don't have to manage it, which is a huge relief.
How is this going to affect the 5-year capital improvement budget process?
The 5-year capital planning process, the 5-year capital plan that we're in year 2 of is continuing. We have a strategic need at this institution to invest in our facilities, particularly in the education and research sphere. We are, like many of our peers, approaching end of useful life on many of these facilities. We've all heard the jokes about Hammond building. We now need to move beyond the humor to doing something about it. And in fact, that is the transformation of our engineering complex in support of 21st century research and education is a vital part of this 5-year capital plan that we're moving forward with, and you'll begin to see the impact of that literally in a matter of months or the next couple of years. as that transformation of West Campus unfolds. Part of the reason why, and where there's an interrelationship between the operating budget and the capital budget, we need to be able to sustain those investments in the transformation of our physical facilities. So that makes it all the more important that we find every way we can to economize on the operating budget side, because the operating budget resources are needed in many instances to sustain the debt service that's going to enable us to make those capital investments. So the two are very much intertwined.
And I just add to that, that as part of the recommendations from the Strategic Budget Task Force, there will be a working group that will be looking at how the capital and operating budgets impact one another. When we move to multi-year planning, that will allow us to see what the impact is of the capital plan and allow us to model different scenarios under which we have different levels of investment into our capital program, and understand then what we would need on the operational side in order to support that.
We had a couple of questions come in about the Commonwealth campuses. Are there any looks to combine either entire campuses or services?
Services, absolutely, and that's been something that has been going on for a number of years, actually, whether it's HR and other sort of personnel-oriented support services or IT. We have really been building more of a clustered network across the campuses, particularly the ones that are in close proximity to one another. So that is something that we have done, and we will continue to look for opportunities to drive those efficiencies. You can imagine that one of the most common questions we get asked, being one university geographically distributed with 24 locations, including 19 Commonwealth campuses, is do we have too many campuses, and do we need to sort of rationalize this? I think our very firm belief is that the nature of Penn State's mission as the Commonwealth's land-grant institution is to serve the citizens of Pennsylvania as best we can wherever they are. Our campuses play an extraordinary role in helping us do that and facilitating the fulfillment of our mission. We work very hard to make the campuses as efficient and effective as they can be, but the commitment that we have to Pennsylvania communities through our campuses is very profound, and I don't envision that being something that we will be walking away from in any way in the foreseeable future.
What's the data point, Nick? We're within an easy half-hour drive, I think, of 95% of the population of Pennsylvania. We're the only institution in the state that can say that, and that's an enormous advantage for us in terms of the fulfillment of our land-grant mission. Mm-hmm.
It's slightly off topic, but we have received a couple of these questions about the December 31st and the decision to remain open on that day. Can you address this?
Yes, we are planning to remain open on that day. I understand the underlying question. The question underneath the question is, why isn't the institution giving that as just a paid holiday? And we really feel that our allocation of paid time off is very generous. We are going to be closed for sort of the usual period of time, and if people wish to use one of their vacation days to be at home on December the 31st, they're more than welcome to do that, but we don't have any plans to offer that as paid time off. That may not be welcome news to folks, but again, I think the institution is very generous with its employees with respect to paid holidays and paid time off. This
is an issue that comes up once every 5 to 6 years, depending on where the leap years fall. And it's when Christmas and New Year's Day fall on a Wednesday. This happened last time. This happened. There were similar questions. Basically, what we're doing this time is we are adopting the practice that Penn State has adopted every time this has happened in the past. The one time we deviated from it, boy, did we get an earful because we changed things around a little bit. I fully agree with David's comment that we have generous vacation allowances. People are welcome to use that day, but this is a day that the university does need to declare itself open. We're a big enterprise. Even though it's the holiday period, there is work to be done, and there will be people here working. All of our tech services workers will be here. So the university is open for business. One other comment I would make, not to take a swing at one of our Big Ten partners, but just be glad this is not Indiana University, because over the holiday period, they are closed on Christmas Day and New Year's Day. Period. Open for business the rest of the time.
Thank you. How can units and departments plan looking ahead to potential future cuts and the need for this ongoing constant belt tightening? How can they plan moving forward?
I'll take a first crack at that. Again, as we move into a world and onto a platform that better supports multi-year budgeting, I think this will become somewhat easier in the future than it is today. At the present time, I would be the first to acknowledge that it's not the easiest thing to do. It's difficult to navigate that planning process, but we nonetheless have to ask our unit budget executives to engage in that thoughtful process of strategic planning and tying their resource plans to that. It should get a little bit mechanically easier as I say, as we move into the future with SIMBA better able to support the whole concept of multi-year resource planning. But in the meantime, we need to ask people to take their best shot at it. Now, at the same time, we understand fully that the university will need to continue to make some strategic investments in our future. We're a world-class university, and we want to remain absolutely a world-class institution. So this is part of the engagement of constant conversation with the Board of Trustees about how we effectively position ourselves to meet that mandate of maintaining our positioning as a leading institution. There's a reason why Penn State has been successful in bucking demographic trends. As I think you're all painfully aware, there's been a downdraft for several years now that will continue for several years into the future of 18-year-olds. This is something that's bedeviling every college and university. It's particularly acute in the Northeast region around us and up into New England. Some institutions are closing, some are merging, others are not meeting their enrollment targets, including prominent institutions right here in Pennsylvania. Somehow, and again, I would argue that it's because of the esteem in which Penn State is held and the fact that we do have such a reputation for high quality, we've managed to buck that trend. But it's going to be through some thoughtful belt tightening and repositioning that we are able to maintain that into the future and not see our position of strength degraded.
Yeah, all of you do your jobs on a daily basis. We have some of the answers, I think, or we think we have some of the answers to how we're going to do some of this moving forward. But we don't even begin to think that we have all of the answers. A lot of the answers lie with you. You are the ones who come to work every day. You do your jobs. You do transactions as part of processes. You have many, many more touch points than the three of us on the stage do, or any of our peers. So there are many, many opportunities for you to always look for opportunities to step back and think about what you're doing in the larger context, and always be asking yourselves, are there ways that we as an institution might think about doing this differently and better? And I think if all of you are doing that on a regular basis, we will continue to get better. We had a group of visitors here from Monash University in Melbourne, Australia last week, and we were talking about some collaborative ventures. And one of the leads of their team in making some remarks on Friday morning made what I thought was a very nice but also a very apropos comment. And he said part of the reason that Monash feels so good about the emerging collaboration with Penn State was that we're like-minded in that the people at neither institution take themselves too seriously, but they take what they do very seriously. And I thought that is a really great characterization of Penn State. So we need you all continue to take what you are doing very seriously, and never be satisfied with the status quo. Always be thinking about ways that we can do it better. And I think if that becomes really a part of the culture here, and I think I shouldn't really speak for David and Mary Lou, but if we were getting emails every day from people with suggestions that, hey, here's an idea about how to do this process better or that process better, we welcome it, because it may be that not every one of those ideas has staying power, but we only need a few per week to really have potential that we can pick up and run with. We can make extraordinary improvements to the way we do business, but we need you to be part of that, and we need your input.
All right, thank you all. That's about all the time for questions we have, but you kind of summed up a little bit there, but do you have anything else you'd like to say as we close?
I do, as a matter of fact. Big surprise. So we've discussed it. We led off with this, but I'll go back to it again. It is, whether we like it or not, this is a period of disruptive change in U.S. higher education, and we are challenged more as an institution than we've ever been challenged before to think about our finances. And everybody is looking at us, and everybody is wanting us to be more efficient. Students, families, government entities are very keenly focused on the cost of a college education. There's almost not a day goes by that you don't hear something in the media about it. Demanding better financial controls to minimize tuition increases, creating more transparency in our budget so people understand what we're spending our money on, and for us to maximize the return on every dollar spent. We are entering, there is no question, a new era in budget management for Penn State. What we're doing is different, for sure. It is profound, and it is going to be impactful. The reason we're doing this is that it will enable us to fulfill our mission and to achieve our goals. Over time, we have made changes to the way we do business, the way we've managed budgets. What we've done in the past is when we've made a change, we've programmed it into IBIS so that IBIS can then implement it. This is a different time. We're pushing a fairly major reset button, transitioning to a whole new enterprise system, and completely rethinking the way we manage resources. So this is important. And most of you will be able to tell your grandkids, I was at Penn State during that time where they completely changed the way they manage resources. I hope everyone leaves today with a better understanding and appreciation of what we're thinking about here and where we're going, and what we're ultimately doing to drive the continued success of Penn State. I think David said it very well a few moments ago. There is some good news here, right? This is hard stuff. This is heavy lifting. But we have kept tuition for Pennsylvania residents flat for 3 of the last 5 years. This is pretty significant. Those of you who were here a decade or so ago can remember that we used to raise tuition by double-digit percentages multiple years in a row, and nobody said a word. I mean, that was all just fine. We're in a different era, and the fact that Penn State, an institution this big and complex, has been able to keep tuition increases to 0 3 of the last 5 years is significant. Without our students, if we're not able to support our students and get them here, make Penn State affordable and keep them and right through graduation. Without those students, there is no Penn State, right? So this is really important. Thank you for participating. I really appreciated the questions. David?
Nick talked about the fact that we're living through an era of significant disruption and transformation, and that is affecting all of us here at Penn State. We hear a lot about change fatigue, and we ask you to hang in there, that this is just the nature of the world in which we live. It's not unique to Penn State, and in some instances, we forestalled a lot of those changes for a goodly number of years as we hung on to systems like IBIS and ISIS, the predecessor to Lion Path. And so a lot of these painful changes that we're going through, these transformations, are owing to the fact that we had reasonable stability for a very long period of time. And we do understand and are empathetic with the fact that this disruption and this transformation can be unsettling for folks and wearisome even to some extent. Draw some solace from the fact that this institution, as we move through this period of disruption, as we move through a demographic downdraft that's national in its scope, we are coming at this from a positioning of incredible strength. Every year, President Barron, Nick, and I, and other colleagues travel to New York City to meet with our credit rating agencies, Moody's and Standard & Poor's. And that isn't merely an exercise in looking at the financial statements of the institution, although that certainly is part of that. They're certainly focusing in on how we stand in terms of our balance sheet, our income statement, and our expenses, and so forth. But much more than that, they're looking at the demand ratios with admissions and seeing that Penn State is incredibly strong. They're looking at our program of philanthropy, and they're seeing each and every year that we're ahead of schedule with respect to our fundraising efforts. They look at our research prowess and seeing year over year dramatic growth in the awards that our great faculty members receive from NIH, from NSF, and other grantor agencies. And they look literally across the entire plane at the well-being of this institution. And what is the determination that they arrive at? That this is a AA, or in the case of Moody's, a AA1 rated institution. That is at the very highest level of institutional credit quality. And again, it's reflective not just of financial strength and stability, it is reflective of an entire institution that is top-notch. So everybody, I think, should draw encouragement from the fact that as we face these challenges together, we're doing so from a position of incredible strength. And I think that should give us all encouragement that we have what it takes here at Penn State to navigate the waters ahead in a highly effective way with the help of all of you. Thank you.
And I'd like to thank everyone who attended both in person and online and asked questions to learn more about the direction we're going. Thank you to Nick Jones, David Gray, and Mary Lou Ortiz for answering those questions. And I would like you to all go to liveevents.psu.edu. You will find a survey there about this town hall. Please fill it out, and you will have an option to tell us what topics you'd like to see covered in the future. Again, thank you all for attending, and have a good rest of the day.